Serious. What is the downright scariest thing that has ever happened to you, be it paranormal or otherwise? Story 1. I fell asleep on the couch at around 6 or 7 p.m. and woke up at 4 a.m. in the middle of my backyard when it was raining. Answer: oh man. When I was little, I was terrified of my bed. It was an antique and was literally over 100 years old. I would knock on it and hear knocks back from underneath. One night I woke up under my bed all the way against the wall. This was a queen-size bed and stood like 3 off the ground, and I was a light sleeper. I don't know how I could have managed to fall off the bed, then slide over to the wall in my sleep. The thing that terrifies me the most is, it would have been more plausible if I could roll underneath the bed, but there wasn't enough space under it to do that. I would have had to fall and somehow wiggle or slide over if I wasn't just dragged to the wall. Story 2. I was about 5 or 6 years old, living in Dallas, and I was in the nurse's office when the tornado warning siren went off. The nurse ran out of the room towards the other side of the school, leaving me behind. The lights had gone off and I didn't want to be alone, so I went to follow her and ended up on this ramp that connected both sides of the school. To the right of me was the cafeteria, and on my left was a wall with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was so dark outside that I could barely see anything out the window. The sound of the siren combined with the intense wind scared me the most. By this point, I was in tears and I just stood there for who knows how long, because I was so scared. Then the vice principal came running up the ramp, scooped me in her arms and asked whose class I was in. I remember walking into the classroom and seeing my teacher with a flashlight in her hands, huddled with the other students in the middle of the classroom. 16 years later, Miss May is still my hero. Story 3. One time I woke up and my eyes were super dry, like beyond description. I opened them and it was pitch black, couldn't see a thing, but I knew there was light in the room since my alarm went off, so it must have been 8 a.m. at least. I literally felt my eyelids to make sure they weren't closed. I shut them and cried for like a minute to moisturize them, and I could see again. So yeah, waking up blind is not a fun thing to have happen. Answer: that reminds me of when I was maybe 4 or 5 and had a pink eye in both eyes and woke up with my eyes stuck shut. It was just all that gunk that comes from the infection, and I was so fudge scared and screaming, and my mom finally helped me and told me it'd be okay. After that, she was there every morning with a warm, wet washcloth to rub my eyes with, so they would be able to open if it happened. I love my mom so much. Story 4. Flying from Denver to NYC, about 30 seconds after the plane leaves the ground, the left engine explodes, likely a bird, they said. I'm pretty calm, but start getting freaked out when I notice the stewardess are all crying, completely freaked out when we are getting close to landing, and there are fire trucks all up and down the runway. And the runway we are landing at is way the hell away from the terminal and everything else. Wow. So I don't wish this situation upon anyone. But if it ever does happen to anyone, you must get on the next flight. Some of my fellow passengers opted to take a train home. If I'd done that, I'm positive I would have never flown again. Answer: my teacher used to work with Boeing. He told me that it's common for a bird to hit the engine on takeoff. Pilots are extensively trained to navigate the plane to land if this happens, since it's possible with the second engine. So it's scary but a very controlled situation. Now if birds hit both engines, then you get that pilot who landed in that river in America. Story 5. Fell 75 feet off a cliff when I was in my 20s. I was pretty sure I was going to die, but I got lucky. Story 6. When I was 16, I was at a local mall by myself. I noticed a large man kept going where I would go and just gave me a bad gut feeling. After about 15 minutes of him following me around, I go into a Starbucks, and sure enough, he follows. The Starbucks was right next to the mall's public restroom, and I so stupidly decided to go into the women's room, thinking he wouldn't follow. I go into a stall, lock the door, and pull my feet up so they can't be seen, since the stall's lot didn't continue to the floor. No more than 10 seconds later, I hear the bathroom door open and someone walking in. The man stopped in front of my stall door and just stands there, facing it for what felt like minutes. He was so close to the door, his boots were pretending into the stall. Then, without any words spoken from either of us, he left, and I never saw him again. Scariest few minutes of my life, and I'm still so mad at myself for isolating myself in a bathroom. Answer: I worked in a coffee shop in high school. One night, right around closing, this woman comes up to the counter looking slightly frantic and tells us someone is following her. We told her to come into the back with us and use the phone to call the police. As the office door closed, in walked a disheveled-looking guy. He just stood there looking around the store for a minute or so, and not seeing her, turned and left. Never be afraid to ask for help from other people. Story 7. 2 of my friends were spending the night at my parents' house. We were all still in high school. My bedroom was a room away from the kitchen, connected by a pantry and hallway. I heard the back door handle jiggle, which meant a cat wanted to go outside. So I went to let it out and get a drink. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed there was no cat there, and the door to the basement was wide open, which we always left closed and locked. So I closed and locked the basement door, a tad unnerved, but it didn't matter. Next to the basement door was a staircase that went upstairs to the second floor. This is relevant later. A couple of hours later, I hear the fridge door close. I noticed that because I didn't hear it open, but it was in a different room, so that's not too weird. What made it weird was that I didn't hear anyone walk down the stairs or by my bedroom from the front of the house. The back stairs to the second floor are really loud and creaky, so I would have heard something. Unnerved, I took a knife and went into the kitchen. I see no one in there, but immediately noticed smoke coming up from under the basement door. I opened it up and it was filled with smoke. Closed it. Got my parents up. Call the fire dep, go get ready to sleep in my car for the night, as it was about 4 a.m. at this point. A firefighter comes and tells us it's okay to go back into the house now. For some reason, the furnace had caught fire inside and was filling the house with carbon monoxide. Had my friends and I went to sleep, we'd all be dead. Still have no clue what jiggled the doorknob or closed the fridge, but it kept me alive. Story 8. I was asleep in bed one night and my mom, who had recently taken interest in home security, had put a wooden dowel in my bedroom window and forgot to tell me about it. It was obviously a redneck version of a window lock, because we lived in an old house and didn't have locks on the windows for some reason. Anywho, I found out later that there was an electrical fire in the hallway outside my bedroom, and I woke up to smoke slipping into my bedroom from beneath my door. Being a little kid, I was scared shitless and had no idea what was going on at the time. And so being smart, I thought to try and get out my window, but I couldn't get the dowel out. I spent what felt like 10 minutes trying to get my little fingers around it and slip it out of the window sill, but couldn't. Finally, my mom got into my bedroom, grabbed me and wrapped a wet towel around me, and super-mommed us out of the house, and me safely out of trouble. Best part, she went back in, got our fire extinguisher from under the kitchen sink, and put that fire out herself. Thankfully, it wasn't some huge, home-destroying catastrophe. Story 9. We had a baby monitor that, besides the sound, also monitored the baby's breathing and set off an alarm, CTEs. The alarm would go off on the baby's side to jar them, and also the parents' remote. One night we forget to turn up the sound, and in the middle of the night, I roll over and see the lights pegged. I freaking fly out of bed screaming to my wife. Darting into the nursery, I suddenly find no fudge baby in the crib. I suddenly realize my wife must have brought the little guy to our bed and forgot to turn off the alarm. I wheel around and pass her coming in and say, "He's in our bed." And she screams bloody takedown, because this, she knows, for a fact, is not the case. My whole world just stopped with absolute abject terror. She screams, "Who took my baby?" Somehow, through massive adrenaline rush and massive fright, I Sherlock Holmes it. House alarm is still armed. No windows or doors could have been opened. The nursery door was closed. He must still be in the room. Glance around and see the only place he possibly could be is behind, under the crib. I fall to my hands and knees, and lo and behold, little dude is on his belly, looking at me, smiling. Even thought Mom is hysterical. Reach under and gently pull him out by his ankles, and Mom meanwhile sees this and assumes he's not alive. Because how the hell does a 1-year-old climb out of a high-sided crib when he can't even stand and manage a 4-foot fall unharmed? She scooped him up and cried for an hour, rocking him. I didn't sleep that night. Little monster has had us guessing ever since. Answer, darn you. I had nearly forgotten, or at least suppressed, but your story brought it back. My middle child, my oldest son, was maybe 3, and he and I were home alone. His older sister was at school, and his mom was gone on some errand. I worked 3rd shift and was always sleep-deprived. I waited him out, and sure enough, he started twirling his hair in the way he did when ready to nap. We got on the couch with him on my chest, and when he fell asleep, so did I. I woke a few hours later, and he wasn't on my chest. Normally, he would have poked at my eyes and woke me up, but not this time. I listened, but all was quiet. I got up to catch him at whatever mischief he was into, but he was nowhere. He wasn't in the house. It's important to point out that we live on a very rural farm. If he wasn't in the house, the potential was terrifying. Outside I went. The weather wasn't an issue. The pond and the wells and the horses were my immediate thought. I spent the next hour plus screaming, crying, searching for my son. Sheer uncontrollable terror that I don't wish to contemplate any further. Then, the greatest thing to ever happen took place. My wife drove into the driveway. I ran to her. Distraught. In the back seat in his car seat was my namesake. The next little bit is a fog. I basically collapsed. Turns out she had come home and found us asleep and gently picked him up and left to finish her errands. She had hoped I could get the rest I needed. She didn't leave a note. Story 10. When I was younger and visiting my parents, I took my stumpy, never met a stranger, lab mutt out to go potty around 5 a.m. At the end of the super long driveway, I ran into a guy just kind of hanging out in the pine trees. He asked for a cigarette, and when I said I didn't have one, he wished me a good night. The whole time my happy little dog, she must have been about 10 months old, was straining towards him for attention. I get halfway up the driveway, and she suddenly lunges behind me, practically ripping my shoulder out of the socket, just going absolutely apeshoot, something I have never and still haven't seen from her to this day, 8 years later. When I spun around to get her under control, I see the guy is just beyond her reach, booking it away. He was following me up the driveway. Later, I remember my family remarking over the few days I was there that it smelled like cigarettes around the front porch and garage. This guy had probably been hanging around our house. I don't know what would have happened had my dog not flipped her chute. A photo of said stumpy dog to lighten the post. Answer: dogs are really awesome. I've had mine just over a year. She's a husky and loves everyone. Well, almost everyone. More than once she's randomly charged behind me on a midnight walk to stop someone coming near us. Most people she doesn't care about. But she has protected me from one of 2 men. She also refused to greet the tipsy man who stole a scooter from a kid the other week. The kids were terrified, and she stayed right next to them behind me while I got their scooter backs and gave them an escape. The poor kids were terrified, and all the other adults in the park, parents, were ignoring this guy with them. I was pretty pissed as I went over and stayed with them after one of the kids asked me to. Story 11. Just copy-pasting one of my old comments. I saw something weird fudge creepy. So, have you ever seen what you thought looked like a person out of the corner of your eye, but they disappear before you get a good look at it? Well, while I was on Netflix and browsing Reddit, when I saw a head peeking out from the stairwell. When I looked at it, it was still there. It slowly moved its head back behind the wall. I got a good enough look at it that it seemed to be charred burned. The thing that creeps me out the most is that my puppy, who was with me at the time, looked at that spot for the next 5 minutes with his hair and ears perked up. Story 12. I was followed by a man in a car one night, and I'm 100% certain he would have tried to abduct me. This was in Chicago after I helped chaperone a debate team trip. I was walking back to my car and the guy passed me, then circled back and passed again. I honestly thought he thought I was an adult worker, and remember thinking he'd be disappointed if he stopped. Then he started driving next to me at walking speed, but had to move when another car came. I crossed and crouched behind a parked car for a minute, and when I stood up, he was gone, kept walking, and when I got to the next intersection, he was hiding on a cross street. I was almost back to my car, and he was still following me when I ran into a group of teenage-ish girls. I blurted out, "I think that man is following me." Meanwhile, dude parks behind my car, waiting for me to be alone again. Thankfully, the girls walked me to my car and texted me his license plate, but I don't think I've ever felt so unsafe in my life. Answer: when I was a student, I was walking home one night. We didn't live in the best neighborhood, but there were always other students around. As I hiked up the hill, a car full of men slowed down next to me. They were just staring at me. They kept pace with me. The 2 on my side moved their hands down towards the handle, and I bolted all the way home. 1 guy doesn't scare me. 5 do. Never happened again. But I wasn't the only girl to have stuff like that happen. Story 13. I was on a Girl Scout trip staying in this older house in Sandy Hook. I think I was around 11 or 12. We were all in bed, and for some reason I wanted to go downstairs. I remember hearing the parents talking in the downstairs kitchen, and I was walking toward where I saw a lit-up room. Then it all disappears, and I'm standing in the middle of an empty, dilapidated room. Random crap, plaster on the floor, no furniture. I freak out and try to retrace my steps back to where I thought the adults were. I wander around for a bit and finally find a staircase. Weird, the staircase was blocked by a couch at the bottom. Then I realized I had been sleepwalking and somehow managed to go up to the 3rd floor where we were told not to go. Answer: dude, sleepwalking is terrifying. I stayed at my cousin's flat and did it there on 2 separate occasions. Once waking up lying in the middle of their hallway, and the other time I locked myself in the bathroom and couldn't unlock the door until I realized what was happening and gave myself time to wake up properly. The worst was when I slept on the top bunk. I climbed over the wrong side of the bed whilst sleepwalking and landed on a radio. Story 14. I was coming home really late one night, and I backed my car into the driveway as usual. It was a cloudy, dark night, and the porch light was off. The front porch of my house is old and made out of wood. It's about 3 to 4 feet off of the ground, with space to crawl underneath. As I climbed the stairs, I felt my ankle get caught on something, tripping me up a little. I looked down, and there was a hand grabbing my ankle. I gasped and kicked my leg back as hard as I could, breaking the grip. I then ran and frantically unlocked the front door. I finally managed to open the door and get in. I was freaked the fudge out, but I looked out the front window through a crack in the curtains while finding the number for the police department. The cops showed up later, but didn't find anyone, and they said they've never heard of this kind of thing happening before. They said they didn't see any footprints or anything underneath the porch either. This was a couple of years ago, and I still live in the same house. I tell myself that it was some kids from the neighborhood fudge with me, or maybe my friends. No one has ever admitted anything though, but I'll never know for sure, I guess. I did buy a motion activated light for the front porch since then. Story 15. When I was 18, I used to work graveyard shifts at a yacht club, and one night on some downtime, I watched The Exorcist III. The yacht club at night was creepy enough. Lots of creaking boats on their moorings. Long, dark, poorly lit docks. No one around. And a fire station every 50 feet that included a fire axe. So a potential killer would always have a weapon handy if he needed one. So I was doing my rounds, quietly walking the perimeter of the club, the empty clubhouse, and the lengths of the docks, trying not to freak out after so thoroughly freaking myself out. As I was almost finished, I was in a section of dock where some larger boats were moored, so visibility was even worse as I couldn't see over the boats. I walked past one boat when this huge figure, which had been totally quiet until that moment, suddenly lunged toward me screaming incoherently and coming fast. I completely freaked out, and for some reason, my survival instinct thought it would be a good idea to dive into the water. So it's 3 a.m., I'm already terrified, and now I'm underwater, can't see any lights, and then can't find the surface because I came up underneath a floating dock. I started panicking and somehow managed to find my way to a gap where I could breathe. I took a breath, and then, despite still being in a complete state of panic, I found my way to the edge of the dock and looked up. There stood a crane, still slowly opening and closing its wings in a threat display, and still making some shrill, loud noise. It must have been sleeping while standing on a post between some boats, and since it was elevated, it looked even bigger than it was. And it was pretty big. I hauled myself out of the water, and as the tension and adrenaline left my system, I threw up into the water. I've never felt that kind of primal terror before, both when the crane initially scared me and then when I realized I was underwater, in the dark, and couldn't find the surface. Story 16. Back in May, I got together with my now roommate and went hiking with a bunch of his friends. We reached the top of the mountain, where there was a cliff and scenic overlook. After a few minutes of taking pictures, we went off to a trail that led off to the side. Soon after we left, I heard the most terrified scream. I immediately ran back to the cliff, where I saw a middle-aged man sitting down at the edge with a devastated look on his face. I asked a woman next to me what had happened, and she said his wife had fallen off the cliff. The cliff was about 150 feet tall, so I knew that there was little chance of her being alive. But if she was, people needed to reach her quickly. I ran to the edge of the cliff and looked over to see her body lying face down on the ground, while I tried to figure out how to get down to her. Several people, including my roommate, were able to find their way down to her. She was unconscious, with one side of her face caved in. Blood was flowing heavily out of her ears and mouth. Her ribs and pelvis had been crushed, and one leg was twisted 180. Amazingly, they were able to feel a pulse, and they heard gurgling, so it seemed that she was still alive. One of the women at the top of the cliff was a psychologist. She yelled down to those caring for the woman to list out things that would have emotional response names of her husband, kids, dogs, etc. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to respond to any of it. I learned later on that it wasn't long after they felt her pulse and heard gurgling that they knew she was dead. Apparently, gurgling is a sign of being brain dead, so she had died as soon as she hit the ground, but her body continued to function for a bit longer. Wisely, the people with her didn't tell us that out of fear of making the husband even more upset. He was having a panic attack the entire time. One woman helped to comfort him and try to calm him down. At one point I heard her say to him, "It isn't your fault." I assumed that he just meant he shouldn't have brought them hiking, which is normal guilt for people experiencing something so traumatic. But I later learned how